I corrected my mother-in-law at a family dinner when she tried to take credit for choosing my daughter's name. But my husband says I was too harsh and created unnecessary drama. Maybe I should have just stayed quiet, but this name means everything to me, and I couldn't let her rewrite our story. My name is Stephanie, and I'm 28 years old. I've been married to my husband Nathan for almost 2 years now, and we have an 11-month-old daughter named Iris. That name isn't random, it comes from a character in a book and movie franchise that Nathan and I absolutely love. But apparently, my mother-in-law thinks she deserves credit for it, and I'm questioning whether I was wrong to set the record straight. Nathan and I met 4 years ago at a comic convention, actually. I was dressed as one of my favorite fantasy characters when I bumped into him at a merchandise booth. We started talking about our shared love for this particular fantasy series about magical realms and fearless heroines. The main female character was named Iris. She was intelligent, courageous, and had this incredible way of seeing through deception while maintaining her compassion. We spent the entire convention together, discussing theories about the books and geeking out over every detail of the movies. Our relationship blossomed from that shared passion. We'd have movie marathons that lasted entire weekends, reading sessions where we'd quote our favorite passages to each other, and long conversations about what made these characters so compelling to us. Iris, in particular, represented everything we admired in a person: wisdom, bravery, and unwavering loyalty to those she loved. She was the kind of character who would stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or unpopular. When we got engaged 2 years after meeting, we already knew without question that if we ever had a daughter, Iris would be her name. It wasn't even a discussion, it felt like destiny. We would joke about our future daughter, wondering if she would inherit Iris's sharp wit or her ability to see the truth in any situation. The name represented not just our love for the character, but our hopes and dreams for our future child. The wedding planning process gave me my first real taste of Nathan's mother's personality. Dorothy is a woman who likes to be involved in everything, and I mean everything. She had opinions about our choice of venue, the color of the bridesmaids' dresses, the flowers, the menu, even the wording on our invitations. At first, I thought it was sweet that she cared so much about our wedding. Nathan is her eldest child and only son, so it made sense that she would be excited about his big day. But as the months went on, I started to notice that Dorothy didn't just have opinions, she had a way of making those opinions feel like requirements. When I mentioned wanting wildflowers for the centerpieces, she immediately launched into why roses would be more elegant and traditional. When we chose a buffet-style dinner instead of plated meals, she spent 20 minutes explaining why plated dinners were more sophisticated. Every conversation felt like I was being gently but firmly steered toward her preferences. Nathan, bless him, was caught in the middle. He wanted to make both his mother and me happy, which meant he often found himself playing mediator. "Mom just wants everything to be perfect," he would say when I expressed frustration. "She means well, she just has strong opinions." The wedding itself was beautiful, despite the stress of the planning process. Dorothy gave a touching speech about how happy she was to welcome me into the family, and I genuinely felt moved by her words. She talked about how she had prayed for Nathan to find someone who would love him as much as his family did, and how grateful she was that her prayers had been answered. Nathan's sister, Melissa, was there with her husband Greg, and their 2 young children. Melissa and I had gotten along well during the engagement period. She was more laid back than her mother, with a dry sense of humor that I appreciated. She had warned me, half-jokingly, about Dorothy's tendency to take charge of family situations. "Mom likes to be the general of the family army," Melissa had told me over lunch one day. "Just nod and smile, and pick your battles carefully. Trust me, it's not worth fighting over everything." I thought I understood what she meant, but I didn't realize how that dynamic would play out in the years to come. 8 months after our wedding, I found out I was pregnant. Nathan and I were both thrilled. We had wanted to start a family right away, and everything was falling into place perfectly. The morning I took the pregnancy test, I was shaking with excitement as I waited for the results. When those 2 pink lines appeared, I actually started crying with joy. Nathan was at work when I found out, so I had to wait all day to tell him. I planned this elaborate reveal. I wrapped up a pair of tiny baby shoes and put them in a gift box. When he opened it that evening, the look on his face was absolutely priceless. He picked me up and spun me around the kitchen, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe it," he kept saying. "We're going to be parents. We're really going to be parents." Of course, the first thing he wanted to do was call his parents. Dorothy screamed with excitement when we told her the news over speakerphone. She immediately launched into planning mode, asking about due dates, discussing baby showers, wondering about nursery themes. It was overwhelming but also heartwarming to see how excited she was about becoming a grandmother. When we found out we were having a girl at the 20-week ultrasound, Nathan and I exchanged meaningful looks. We had been hoping for a daughter, partly because we were so excited about the name Iris. That evening, as we were looking at the ultrasound photos, Nathan brought up what we were both thinking. "So," he said with a grin, "I guess it's time to officially decide on Iris?" "I think we decided on Iris about 3 years ago," I laughed. "We're just making it official now." We were having dinner at Dorothy and Frank's house the following Sunday when we decided to share the name we had chosen. The whole family was there, Nathan's parents, Melissa, Greg, and their kids. Everyone was fawning over the ultrasound pictures and asking questions about the baby. "So, have you thought about names yet?" Dorothy asked as she passed around a plate of her famous chocolate chip cookies. Nathan and I looked at each other and smiled. "Actually, we've had a name picked out for a while," he said. "If it's okay with everyone, we'd like to call her Iris." There was a moment of silence as everyone processed this information. Dorothy tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was thinking about something. "Iris," she repeated slowly. "That's interesting. How do you pronounce it exactly? Iris or Iris?" "Iris," I replied. "Like the flower, or the part of your eye?" Dorothy said, her brow furrowing slightly. "Won't that be confusing for people? They might not know how to say it right away. And it's quite unusual, isn't it?" I felt a small pang of disappointment at her reaction, but I tried to stay positive. "It's from a character in our favorite book series," I explained. "She's really inspiring, she's brave and intelligent and loyal." "Well," Dorothy said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I suppose if that's what you've decided on, then that's what matters. It's certainly unique." Nathan squeezed my hand under the table. I could tell he was also a bit taken aback by his mother's lukewarm response, but he didn't say anything. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Dorothy disapproved of our choice. Over the next few weeks, Dorothy's comments about the name continued. She would bring it up in casual conversation, always with that same slightly puzzled tone. "I was talking to my friend Martha about baby names," she said during one visit, and when I mentioned Iris, she had the same concern I did about pronunciation. She wasn't sure how to say it either. Or, "I saw the most beautiful traditional names in a baby name book at the store. Names like Elizabeth, Catherine, Margaret, names that never go out of style and everyone knows how to pronounce." Each comment felt like a tiny needle prick. Nathan and I had been so excited about our chosen name, and Dorothy's constant subtle criticism was starting to wear me down. When I mentioned my frustration to Nathan, he tried to reassure me. "She'll come around once the baby is born," he said. "You know how Mom is, she just needs time to adjust to new ideas." She was the same way about our wedding venue, remember? But she ended up loving it. I wanted to believe him, but something felt different about this. The wedding venue was one thing, but this was our daughter's name, something deeply personal and meaningful to us. Dorothy's reaction felt like more than just needing time to adjust, it felt like disapproval. The rest of my pregnancy was a whirlwind of preparations and doctor's appointments and baby showers. Dorothy threw me a beautiful shower, inviting all her friends and church ladies along with my own friends and family. She went all out with decorations and games and a gorgeous cake. I was genuinely touched by the effort she put into making it special. But even at the shower, the name issue came up. Several of Dorothy's friends asked about what we were planning to call the baby, and I noticed Dorothy's subtle grimace every time I said Iris. A few of the older ladies made comments similar to Dorothy's concerns about pronunciation and uniqueness. "Oh, like the flower," one lady said. "That's different. Is that a family name?" When I explained about the character from our favorite book series, I got polite nods and smiles, but I could tell some of them thought we were being unnecessarily creative or unconventional. Dorothy just stood there with that same tight smile, not defending our choice or expressing enthusiasm about her future granddaughter's name. Labor came 2 weeks early, on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. After 14 hours of contractions and pushing, Iris finally made her appearance, all 7 pounds, 3 ounces of her, with a head full of dark hair and the most alert, curious eyes I had ever seen. The moment I held her for the first time, I knew we had chosen the perfect name. She looked exactly like an iris, beautiful and delicate but somehow strong at the same time. Nathan cried when the nurse handed her to him, whispering, "Hello, Iris. We've been waiting so long to meet you." Dorothy and Frank arrived at the hospital within an hour of Iris's birth. Dorothy immediately teared up when she saw her first grandchild, and all her previous concerns about the name seemed to disappear in that moment. "Oh, she's absolutely perfect," Dorothy whispered as she held Iris for the first time. "Hello, beautiful girl. Grandma loves you so much already." Watching Dorothy with Iris in those first few days was beautiful. She was clearly smitten with her granddaughter, visiting the hospital every day and helping out when we came home. She brought casseroles and did laundry and held Iris so Nathan and I could catch up on sleep. I felt grateful for her support during those overwhelming early weeks of parenthood. But as the weeks turned into months, I started noticing some concerning patterns in Dorothy's behavior. It was subtle at first, little comments and actions that individually seemed harmless but together painted a troubling picture. She would refer to Iris as "my baby" when talking to her friends at church or in the grocery store. "My baby is such a good sleeper," she would say, or "my baby has the most beautiful eyes." When I gently corrected her once, saying, "You mean your grandbaby," she laughed it off. "Of course, dear. Grandmothers just get so attached, you know." She had opinions about everything related to Iris's care. When we decided to try baby-led weaning instead of starting with purees, Dorothy expressed concern that Iris might choke or not get enough nutrition. When we chose to use cloth diapers, she worried about hygiene and convenience. When we decided to sleep train at 6 months, she questioned whether it was too harsh. Again, individually these seemed like normal grandmother concerns. But the pattern was becoming clear: Dorothy needed to be involved in every decision, and she had a way of making her disapproval known even when she wasn't directly criticizing our choices. Nathan was oblivious to most of this, or at least he pretended to be. When I brought up my concerns about his mother's over-involvement, he would dismiss them as normal new grandmother excitement. "She's just excited about being a grandma," he would say. Melissa went through the same thing when her kids were born. "It's just mom's way of showing love." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just grandmother excitement. It felt like Dorothy was trying to establish herself as an authority figure in our family, someone whose opinions carried weight in our parenting decisions. As Iris grew from a newborn into a more alert and interactive baby, Dorothy's attachment to her seemed to intensify. She would visit multiple times a week, always with gifts or treats or some reason why she needed to see her baby. She would take dozens of photos to share with her friends, always mentioning how much Iris looked like Nathan as a baby or how she had Dorothy's nose or Frank's chin. When Iris started crawling at 8 months, Dorothy was there to witness it. She immediately called all her friends to share the news, saying things like, "Our little Iris is crawling now," and "We're so proud of how advanced she is." The use of "our" and "we" bothered me, but again, I tried to tell myself I was being oversensitive. By the time Iris was 10 months old, she was cruising along furniture and babbling constantly. She was such a happy, curious baby, always studying faces and reaching for new objects to explore. She had that same alert intelligence that made her fictional namesake so compelling. You could see the wheels turning in her little head as she processed the world around her. Nathan and I were so proud of her development and personality. We would spend hours just watching her play and discover new things, marveling at how quickly she was learning and growing. The name Iris suited her perfectly. She was becoming exactly the kind of person we had hoped for when we chose that name. Which brings me to last Sunday, when everything changed. We were having our usual family dinner at Dorothy and Frank's house. Melissa and Greg were there with their kids, and everyone was gathered in the living room after dinner, watching Iris cruise along the coffee table. She had just figured out how to walk along the couch to the armchair and back again, and she was so proud of herself, giggling and clapping every time she successfully made the journey. "Look at her go," Melissa said with a laugh. "She's going to be walking independently any day now." "She's so confident for her age," Greg added. "It's like she really knows who she is already." That's when Melissa made the comment that started everything. "You know, it's amazing how babies sometimes seem to grow into their names. Like Iris really does seem to have embraced who she is, if that makes sense." Greg's wife, Amanda, who had joined the family more recently when she and Greg got married, nodded in agreement. "It really was such a perfect choice by Dorothy. She has such good instincts about these things." I felt my stomach drop. I looked up from where I was sitting on the floor near Iris, confused and suddenly alert. "What do you mean, a perfect choice by Dorothy?" Amanda looked at me with surprise, as if she couldn't understand why I was confused. "Well, didn't Dorothy suggest the name Iris? I thought that's how you guys decided on it." My heart started pounding. "No, Dorothy didn't suggest the name. Nathan and I chose Iris ourselves, long before we even told the family." There was an uncomfortable silence in the room. Everyone was looking back and forth between Amanda, Dorothy, and me. I could feel Nathan tensing up beside me on the couch. Melissa jumped in, looking confused. "But Mom, didn't you mention Iris as a possibility when they were discussing names? I remember you saying something about it." Dorothy, who had been quietly watching this exchange unfold, nodded slowly with a small smile. "Well, I did tell them I thought it was a beautiful name when they mentioned it to me." I felt heat rising in my cheeks. This was absolutely not what had happened, and I couldn't believe Dorothy was trying to rewrite history right in front of me. "Dorothy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you asked about pronunciation and seemed concerned that people would be confused by the name. You said it was unusual and questioned our choice. You never suggested it or said it was beautiful until just now." The room got even quieter. Iris continued babbling and cruising between furniture, completely oblivious to the tension that had suddenly filled the space. Everyone else was frozen, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken. "Names are really a family effort," Dorothy said with that same tight smile she used when she was being politely stubborn. "Everyone in the family contributes to these important decisions in their own way." I looked directly at Nathan, silently pleading with him to back me up. He looked extremely uncomfortable, but after a moment of hesitation, he cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, Stephanie's right. We chose Iris because of the character from our favorite book series. We'd been talking about that name for years, even before we got married." The look Dorothy gave Nathan was one I'll never forget, surprised, hurt, and slightly angry all at once. But I felt a surge of relief and gratitude that my husband had supported the truth, even though it was clearly difficult for him. "I just think it's important to be accurate about where the name came from," I continued, feeling braver now that Nathan had backed me up. "Iris's name is very special to us. It comes from a character who represents everything we hope our daughter will become: intelligent, brave, and honest. This wasn't a family decision or suggestion, it was our choice based on something very personal and meaningful to our relationship." Dorothy's smile became even more forced. "Well, of course, dear. I'm sure the name is very special to you both." But I could tell the damage was done. The rest of the evening was strained and awkward. Dorothy was polite but distant, making small talk about the weather and Iris's eating schedule while pointedly avoiding eye contact with me. Melissa kept shooting glances between her mother and me, clearly trying to figure out what had just happened and whose side she should be on. Even little Iris seemed to pick up on the tension in the room. She became fussier than usual, wanting to be held constantly and crying when anyone other than Nathan or I tried to comfort her. We ended up leaving earlier than usual, with everyone exchanging stilted goodbyes and promises to talk soon. The drive home was quiet except for Iris's babbling from her car seat. Nathan finally spoke when we were almost home, and his words hit me like a punch to the stomach. "Stephanie, I think you were right about what actually happened with the name, but did you really have to correct her in front of everyone like that?" I stared at him in disbelief. She was taking credit for our daughter's name. She was completely rewriting history and letting everyone think she had suggested it. "I know, but you could have handled it more diplomatically. Maybe you could have pulled her aside later, or found a gentler way to bring it up. So I should have just sat there and let everyone believe your mother chose our daughter's name? Let them think this incredibly personal and meaningful decision we made together was actually her idea." Nathan sighed heavily. "I'm not saying you were wrong about the facts. I'm just saying the way you handled it created a lot of unnecessary tension and embarrassment for my mom." "Unnecessary tension?" "Nathan, she was lying. She was taking credit for something that was entirely ours, something that represents our relationship and our hopes for our daughter. How is correcting that lie unnecessary?" "She wasn't exactly lying, Stephanie. She did say the name was nice when we told her about it. There's a huge difference between saying a name is nice when someone tells it to you and actually suggesting or recommending that name. She was letting Amanda and everyone else believe she had come up with the idea, and you know it." We continued this argument in whispers after we got home and put Iris to bed, but we weren't getting anywhere. Nathan maintained that while I was technically correct about the facts, my approach had been too confrontational and had unnecessarily embarrassed his mother in front of the family. I barely slept that night. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head, analyzing every word and wondering if I had been too harsh. Maybe Nathan was right, maybe I should have found a more diplomatic way to handle it. Maybe family harmony was more important than setting the record straight about something that had already happened. But every time I looked at Iris sleeping peacefully in her crib, I felt that protective anger surge through me again. That name represented everything about our love story, our shared dreams, our hopes for our daughter's future. How could I just sit quietly while someone else took credit for that? The next morning, Nathan's phone started buzzing with text messages before he was even fully awake. First from Melissa, then from Dorothy herself. He read them silently, his expression growing more troubled with each message. "What are they saying?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Melissa thinks you were really harsh to Mom. She says you embarrassed her in front of everyone and made the whole evening uncomfortable." "What about your mother?" Nathan hesitated before answering. "She's upset. She says she feels like you attacked her for no reason, and she doesn't understand why you had to be so mean about something so small." "Small? Our daughter's name is small," That's not what she meant, Stephanie. She means the misunderstanding about who suggested it was small. She says she wasn't trying to take credit, she was just trying to be supportive. I felt that familiar frustration building up again. Nathan, there was no misunderstanding. She clearly let Amanda believe that she had suggested the name. And when I corrected her, she doubled down by saying names are a family effort. That's not being supportive, that's taking credit. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his phone. Finally, he looked up at me with tired eyes. I know you're right about what happened. But couldn't you have handled it differently? Maybe said something like, actually, we had already chosen that name because of the book character, without going into all the details about Mom's initial reaction. But that wouldn't have been the whole truth, Nathan. The truth is that your mother questioned our choice and seemed to disapprove of it. She never suggested it or encouraged it. And yesterday, she was taking credit for it. Those are the facts, and I'm not going to sugarcoat them just to spare her feelings. Nathan left for work that morning without resolving anything, and I spent the day feeling terrible. Was I being too stubborn? Was I prioritizing being right over maintaining family relationships? But then I would think about Amanda's comment, about how everyone now believed Dorothy had suggested Iris's name, and I would feel angry all over again. That afternoon, Dorothy called me directly. My stomach clenched when I saw her name on my phone, but I knew I needed to answer. Hello, Dorothy. Hello, Stephanie. Her voice was cold and formal, completely different from her usual warm greeting. I wanted to talk to you about yesterday evening. Okay. I'm very hurt by the way you spoke to me in front of the family. I feel like you deliberately tried to embarrass and humiliate me, and I don't understand why. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Dorothy, I wasn't trying to embarrass you. I was trying to correct a misunderstanding about something very important to Nathan and me. What misunderstanding? I said your chosen name was beautiful. How is that wrong? The misunderstanding was Amanda thinking that you had suggested the name. That's not what happened, and you know it. There was a long pause before Dorothy responded. I think you're being very petty about this, Stephanie. Does it really matter who gets credit for a name? What matters is that we all love Iris and think her name suits her. Yes, Dorothy, it does matter. It matters because that name represents something very personal and meaningful to Nathan and me. It matters because our daughter deserves to know the real story of how she got her name. And it matters because allowing people to believe false information is the same as lying. Another long pause. I think you owe me an apology for the way you spoke to me yesterday. I felt my resolve hardening. I'm sorry that you were hurt by what I said, Dorothy. But I'm not sorry for telling the truth about something important to our family. That's not good enough, Stephanie. I think you need to really consider whether your pride is more important than family harmony. My pride? Dorothy, this isn't about pride. This is about truth and accuracy and protecting what's important to us. I think we should end this conversation before we both say things we'll regret, Dorothy said curtly. I hope you'll think about what I've said. She hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me staring at my phone in shock. I had never heard Dorothy speak to me with such coldness and hostility. It was clear that she saw me as the villain in this situation, the troublemaker who had disrupted family peace for no good reason. When Nathan came home that evening, I told him about the phone call with his mother. His expression grew more and more troubled as I recounted our conversation. She wants me to apologize, I concluded. She thinks I was being petty and prideful. Nathan was quiet for a long time, watching Iris play with her blocks on the living room floor. Finally, he spoke. I talked to Greg today at work, he said slowly. He mentioned something interesting about when Melissa was pregnant with Emma. What? He said that when Emma was born, my mom told people at her church that she had suggested the name Emma. But Greg said he and Melissa had chosen that name months before they even told the family about the pregnancy. I looked at him with raised eyebrows. So this is a pattern? It seems like it might be. Greg said Melissa just decided to let it go because she didn't want to cause family drama, but it really bothered her at the time. And now you're realizing that maybe your mother has a habit of inserting herself into family stories? Nathan nodded slowly. I think you were right to speak up yesterday, Stephanie. I was so focused on avoiding conflict that I wasn't really thinking about what it meant for her to take credit for something so important to us. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Thank you for saying that. I've been second-guessing myself all day, wondering if I was being unreasonable. No, you weren't being unreasonable. Our daughter's name is important, and the story behind it is important. I should have supported you more clearly yesterday instead of making you feel like you did something wrong. That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship and in Nathan's relationship with his mother. Over the next few weeks, Nathan started setting clearer boundaries with Dorothy, gently but firmly correcting her when she would try to take credit for parenting decisions that were ours alone. It was subtle, but I noticed the difference immediately. When Dorothy would mention how we had decided to start Iris on solid foods, Nathan would smoothly interject with something like, "Actually, Mom, that was Stephanie's research and decision. She found some great resources on baby-led weaning." When Dorothy would tell her friends about how we had chosen such developmentally appropriate toys for Iris, Nathan would clarify, "Stephanie really put a lot of thought into choosing toys that would encourage Iris's curiosity and motor development." These small corrections seemed to get the message across. Dorothy's attempts to insert herself into our parenting narrative became less frequent and more subtle. She was still very involved as a grandmother, which I genuinely welcomed and appreciated, but she stopped trying to take credit for decisions that weren't hers to make. The next few Sunday dinners were admittedly awkward. Dorothy was polite but cool toward me, making conversation about surface-level topics while avoiding any meaningful interaction. She would play with Iris and coo over her development, but she barely looked at me directly. Melissa also seemed uncertain about how to navigate the new family dynamics. She was friendly enough, but I could tell she was trying to avoid saying anything that might spark another confrontation. Greg, interestingly, seemed more supportive of me after Nathan had talked to him about the Emma situation. He would make a point of asking me directly about Iris's development and our parenting choices, rather than addressing his questions to the group or to Dorothy. About a month after the initial confrontation, something shifted. We were at Dorothy and Frank's house for Sunday dinner, and Iris was demonstrating her new skill of standing up without holding on to furniture. She would pull herself up using the coffee table, then let go and stand there proudly for a few seconds before sitting back down with a giggle. "She's going to be walking any day now," Melissa observed. "Look how stable she is. She's so determined," Greg added. "You can see her concentrating so hard on keeping her balance." That's when Dorothy, instead of trying to claim credit for Iris's development or making it about herself, looked directly at me and said, "You and Nathan are raising such a confident little girl. She's fearless, just like her namesake." It was the first time Dorothy had acknowledged the connection between Iris and the character she was named after. It was also the first time she had given Nathan and me direct credit for our daughter's development without trying to insert herself into the narrative. "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the comment. "We hope she grows up to be as brave and intelligent as the original Iris." "I'm sure she will," Dorothy said with a small but genuine smile. "You two are wonderful parents." It wasn't a complete resolution, but it felt like a step in the right direction. Dorothy was beginning to acknowledge that Nathan and I were Iris's parents, that our decisions and our influence were shaping our daughter's development. Over the following weeks, our relationship continued to improve slowly. Dorothy still had her moments of wanting to be overly involved, but they became less frequent and less aggressive. When she did overstep, Nathan was quick to gently redirect her, and she seemed to be learning to respect our boundaries. The real test came 2 months later, at Iris's first birthday party. We had planned a small celebration with just family and a few close friends. Dorothy had offered to help with the planning, and I had accepted, hoping that working together on something positive might help rebuild our relationship. To my surprise and delight, Dorothy was wonderful to work with. She asked for my input on decorations and food, rather than just taking charge and making decisions. When I mentioned wanting to have a book-themed party in honor of Iris's literary namesake, Dorothy embraced the idea enthusiastically and found the most beautiful book-themed decorations and party favors. The day of the party, everything was perfect. Iris was in her element, crawling around and pulling herself up on everything, charming all the guests with her bright smiles and infectious giggles. When it came time to open presents, Dorothy had chosen a beautiful set of classic children's books, including several volumes from the series that had inspired Iris's name. "I thought Iris should have her own copies of the stories about her namesake," Dorothy said as she handed me the gift. "Maybe you and Nathan can read them to her when she's older and tell her about how much those characters meant to you both." I was genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the acknowledgement of our family story. "Thank you, Dorothy. These are perfect. I can't wait to share these stories with her someday." Later in the evening, as we were cleaning up after the party, one of my friends made a comment that brought everything full circle. "Iris is such a perfect name for her," my friend Lisa said as she watched Iris toddle around the living room, having just taken her first independent steps that very day. "She's so curious and brave, just like you always said the character was." Dorothy, who was nearby packing up leftover cake, looked over and smiled. "Stephanie and Nathan chose that name so carefully," she said. "They wanted a name that would inspire her to be intelligent and courageous, and I think they succeeded." It was a small moment, but it meant everything to me. Dorothy was publicly acknowledging that Nathan and I had chosen our daughter's name, that it came from our love and hopes for her, not from any family suggestion or collective decision. Later that night, after all the guests had gone home and Iris was asleep in her crib, Nathan and I sat on the couch looking through photos from the party. "Your mom was really great today," I said. "I feel like we've turned a corner." "I think so too," Nathan agreed. "I'm sorry it took me so long to understand what you were trying to protect. Our family's story, Iris's story, that stuff really matters." "It does matter. And I'm glad we didn't let it get rewritten, even though it was uncomfortable for a while." Now, several months later, I can honestly say that our relationship with Dorothy is stronger than it's ever been. She's still very involved as a grandmother, but she respects our role as parents. She still has opinions about our choices, but she expresses them respectfully and accepts our decisions gracefully. Most importantly, she no longer tries to insert herself into our family narrative. When people ask about Iris's name, Dorothy will sometimes share the story herself, accurately. She'll talk about how Nathan and I chose it because of a character from our favorite book series, and how the name represents the qualities we hope Iris will develop. Iris is now 15 months old and walking everywhere, chattering constantly in her own little language, and showing every sign of developing into exactly the kind of person we hoped she would become when we chose her name. She's curious about everything, fearless in her exploration of the world, and has this amazing ability to light up a room with her smile. When people meet her and comment on her name, I tell them about the brave, intelligent character she's named after. I tell them about how Nathan and I bonded over our shared love of those stories, and how we knew from the very beginning that if we had a daughter, she would be our Iris. And that's our story, the real story, the true story. Looking back on that confrontation at Dorothy's dinner table, I'm glad I spoke up. Yes, it caused some temporary family drama. Yes, it was uncomfortable and awkward for everyone involved. But ultimately, it led to important conversations about boundaries, truth-telling, and respect that have made all our family relationships healthier. I learned that sometimes protecting what matters most requires being willing to endure temporary discomfort. Sometimes being diplomatic means allowing lies to become the accepted version of events. Sometimes keeping peace means sacrificing something precious and irreplaceable. But Iris deserves to grow up knowing the real story of her name. She deserves to know that her parents chose it with love and intention, that it represents the values and dreams that brought us together, that it was a decision made with careful thought and deep meaning. When she's older, I'll tell her about the brave, brilliant character she's named after. I'll tell her about how her father and I met at that comic convention, bonding over our shared love of stories and magic and heroic characters who stood up for what was right. I'll tell her that her name isn't just a collection of sounds, but a promise that we see her as the intelligent, courageous, honest person we believe she'll become. And if someday she asks about her grandmother's role in choosing her name, I'll tell her the truth, that Grandma Dorothy was surprised by our choice at first, that she worried people might not understand it or pronounce it correctly, but that she came to love it because she loves Iris. That's the real story, and it's beautiful in its own way, even if it's more complicated than some people might prefer. Sometimes the truth is messier than the version people want to believe. But it's still worth protecting, still worth standing up for, even when it makes people uncomfortable or creates temporary conflict. I don't regret correcting Dorothy that evening at the family dinner. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret doing it. Because our daughter's story, our family story, deserves to be told truthfully. And sometimes, that's worth a little family drama. This whole experience taught me something important about being a mother that goes beyond just feeding schedules and diaper changes and making sure your child doesn't put dangerous things in their mouth. It's also about protecting their story, their identity, their truth. It's about making sure that the narratives that shape their understanding of themselves are accurate and meaningful and rooted in love. Iris will face enough challenges in her life without having to navigate false stories about her own origins. She deserves to know that her name came from parents who dreamed of her long before she existed, who saw her as a character in our own love story, who chose every letter of her name with intention and hope. I think about that night at Dorothy's house often, and I realize now that it wasn't really about the name at all. It was about authority and ownership and who gets to tell the stories that define our families. Dorothy, like many mothers-in-law, struggled with the transition from being the primary woman in her son's life to sharing that role with his wife. Taking credit for naming her granddaughter was a way of asserting her continued importance and influence in our family decisions. But Nathan and I needed to establish ourselves as the primary decision-makers for our own child. We needed to protect our autonomy as parents and our right to make choices based on our own values and preferences, not family pressure or expectations. The name issue became a symbol of that larger struggle. By allowing Dorothy to take credit for something so personal and meaningful, I would have been setting a precedent that her opinions and preferences carried more weight than our own in matters related to our daughter. And that wasn't a precedent I was willing to set. I'm grateful that Nathan eventually understood what was at stake and started supporting my position. It would have been so much harder to navigate this situation if I had felt alone in it, if my own husband had continued to prioritize his mother's comfort over our family's truth. Now, when I watch Iris playing with her toys or babbling her own little stories, I see so much of her namesake in her personality. She approaches new situations with curiosity rather than fear. She studies faces intently, as if she's trying to understand the motivations behind people's expressions. She's determined and persistent when she wants something, but also gentle and affectionate with the people she loves. Maybe it's just wishful thinking on my part, but I like to believe that choosing a name associated with such positive qualities has somehow influenced her development. Or maybe children just have a way of growing into the expectations we set for them through the names we choose and the stories we tell about who they are. Either way, I'm proud of the little person Iris is becoming, and I'm proud that Nathan and I fought to protect the story of how she got her name. That story is part of her heritage, part of her identity, part of the foundation we're building for her understanding of who she is and where she comes from. Dorothy and I have found a good balance now. She's still very much involved in Iris's life as a loving grandmother, but she respects the boundaries we've established as parents. She no longer tries to take credit for our decisions or insert herself into narratives that aren't hers to tell. And in return, I make sure to acknowledge and appreciate all the ways she does contribute to Iris's life: the babysitting, the homemade cookies, the birthday parties, the unconditional love she shows our daughter every day. Family relationships are complicated, and they require constant negotiation and adjustment as circumstances change. Having children adds new layers of complexity as everyone figures out their new roles and responsibilities. But I've learned that it's possible to maintain those relationships while still protecting what matters most, as long as everyone is willing to communicate honestly and respect each other's boundaries. The other day, Iris said her first clear word beyond mama and dada. She was playing with one of her favorite books, one of the volumes Dorothy gave her for her first birthday, and she pointed at the illustration of the main character and said, "Clear as day, Iris." Nathan and I looked at each other in amazement. Our 15-month-old daughter had just identified herself with the character she was named after. It was one of those perfect parenting moments that you want to bottle up and save forever. Later that evening, I called Dorothy to tell her about Iris's new word. I could hear the joy and pride in her voice as I described the moment, and she immediately asked me to bring Iris over the next day so she could hear it for herself. "That's wonderful," Dorothy said warmly. "She really is growing up to be as smart as her namesake, isn't she? You and Nathan chose such a perfect name for her." It was a simple comment, but it meant so much to me. Dorothy was acknowledging, once again, that we had chosen Iris's name thoughtfully and well. She was supporting our family's story rather than trying to rewrite it. As I write this, Iris is napping in her crib, probably dreaming whatever dreams fill the minds of 15-month-old children. Maybe she's dreaming about the books we read to her, or the toys she loves to play with, or the faces of the people who love her most. I hope she's dreaming about adventures and discoveries, about all the wonderful things she'll learn and experience as she grows up. I hope she's dreaming about being brave and kind and intelligent, about using her voice to stand up for what's right, about approaching the world with curiosity and confidence. And I hope that someday, when she's old enough to understand the full story of her name, she'll be proud of the parents who fought to protect that story for her. I hope she'll understand that standing up for truth, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient, is one of the most important lessons we can teach her. Names have power. They carry the hopes and dreams we have for our children, the values we want to instill in them, the stories we want them to carry forward into their own lives. Iris will grow up knowing that her name came from love, from intention, from parents who saw her potential before she was even born. That's her story, our story, the story we protected by refusing to let someone else claim credit for one of the most important decisions we've made as parents. And every time someone asks about her beautiful, unique name, we'll tell that story truthfully and proudly. Because in the end, that's what good parents do. We protect our children's stories, their identities, their truth. We stand up for what matters, even when it's difficult. We teach them, through our actions, that some things are worth fighting for. And if Iris grows up to be half as brave and intelligent and principled as the character she's named after, then Nathan and I will know we succeeded in the most important job we'll ever have, raising a daughter who knows her own worth and isn't afraid to stand up for what's right, just like we did for her that evening at her grandmother's dinner table. That confrontation was uncomfortable, but it was also necessary. It established important boundaries, protected an important truth, and ultimately led to stronger, more honest relationships with our extended family. Most importantly, it ensured that our daughter will grow up knowing the real story of how she got her name, a story of love, intention, and parents who were willing to fight for what mattered most. That's the story I'll tell her someday, and that's the truth that will help shape her understanding of who she is and where she came from. And I'll sleep peacefully every night knowing that we protected that story for her, even when it would have been easier to just stay quiet and keep the peace. Sometimes being a good parent means making difficult choices, having uncomfortable conversations, and standing up for principles that matter more than temporary harmony. This was one of those times, and I'm grateful I found the courage to speak up when it mattered most.